Imagine standing at the edge of the world, where every whisper of the wind carries ancient secrets, and every shadow hints at prophecy. This is where our journey begins, one that unravels myths and reveals the extraordinary. Stay with us until the end to discover how Mara's courage and faith ignite hope in a world teetering on the brink of collapse. And hey, if you're as intrigued as I am about this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more narratives that challenge the ordinary. Got thoughts on the apocalypse or tales of resilience? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Let's dive in. Mara stood at the edge of the old highway, the sky overhead stained with uneasy shades of crimson, like a foreboding twilight that refused to yield to night. Her village, once a place of small comforts and gentle routine, had recently become flooded with rumors, whispers that ancient prophecies were coming to life. Travelers spoke of distant lands ravaged by violence and disease, of strange omens appearing in the heavens. Mara's heart pounded as she recalled the old texts her grandmother used to read to her. Verses about beasts and bowls of wrath, about a new world breaking forth from old decay. Once, these sounded like riddles or distant fables. Now, the world seemed strangely poised on the brink of something immense and terrifying. Flocks of crows circled low in the fading light, their shadows skimming the cracked asphalt. Mara's family and neighbors gathered near her, their eyes turned to a distant plume of smoke rising beyond the barren fields. No one knew who lit the fires or what it meant, but the tension in the air pressed upon them. An older man with a walking stick, the village's unofficial historian, muttered half-remembered verses about 4 riders and a great upheaval. Mara listened with a trembling curiosity. She had never considered these prophecies might erupt into reality. Yet here they were, on the cusp of something unknown. Looking down the empty road, Mara sensed that life as she knew it was coming undone. The ground beneath her feet felt unsteady, as if the earth itself knew it was entering its final acts. A wind stirred, carrying the distant screams of strangers caught in conflicts she could not see. Mara said a silent prayer, for strength, for guidance, for some glimmer of hope in a landscape now overshadowed by ancient warnings. That night, the villagers huddled in the old meeting hall, its wooden beams creaking under the weight of fear and uncertainty. Mara sat near the center, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the historian's voice quaver as he recounted stories that matched their unfolding reality. He spoke of a rider on a white horse appearing in visions, one who would conquer and usher in a long era of strife. Mara saw some villagers exchange doubtful glances, but no one dared to openly mock him. Something in the air felt too charged, too real. In the morning, the horizon bore witness to escalating turmoil. They heard reports, carried by weary messengers, that armed bands were roaming the countryside, plundering resources. Villages were being emptied, lands burned. Mara's family decided to leave their homestead, carrying whatever they could salvage in worn sacks. As they walked, they passed fields that had become battlegrounds overnight. Bodies lay scattered, and the stench of death was impossible to ignore. Over a distant ridge, Mara glimpsed a lone horseman, dressed in pale robes. He seemed impossibly still upon his mount. Something about that distant figure made Mara's hair stand on end. Some shouted it was a herald of war. Others said it was a dream conjured by panic. As the group ventured onward, Mara's mind lingered on that silent silhouette. They traveled through hollowed-out towns stripped of supplies, moving carefully between abandoned structures that had once been bustling markets. Dry winds scattered ash over broken carts and torn flags. Again and again, Mara heard snippets of scripture echo in her mind, the old verses of judgments and harbingers. It was one thing to hear about prophecies in peaceful times, quite another to walk amid them, uncertain if she'd live to see another dawn. As Mara's group pressed onward, they entered a region once known for its abundant harvests. Now, it lay desolate. Fields once golden with grain had turned into dust-ridden plains. Mara struggled to imagine the bountiful feasts that used to take place here. The old historian whispered about another horseman, a red rider who symbolized war. Mara wondered if each rider was appearing in turn, peeling away the layers of human civilization. After a sleepless night camping in the ruins of a stone barn, the travelers awoke to the distant thunder of artillery, cannon fire from directions unknown. As they marched forward, they encountered refugees, hollow-eyed and shivering, who spoke of fierce battles erupting along the highways. Entire armies seemed to have sprung up overnight, each driven by conflicting ideologies. They fought for water, for territory, or for the last scraps of civilization. Mara watched as a ragged soldier staggered past them, clutching a blood-soaked bandage on his arm. He collapsed without a word. A silence fell among the travelers. How many more would die before dawn? How many had already fallen to these new wars? In a half-collapsed watchtower, Mara found old scraps of paper scrawled with panic notes. Someone had tried to catalog the chaos, naming battles, tallies of casualties, descriptions of burning fields. The notes ended abruptly. Outside, a few travelers tried to tend to the wounded soldier who still lay unmoving. Others prayed quietly. Mara thought again of the sacred texts, a red horse, a blade, and endless bloodshed. War given free rein. She struggled to understand why. Was this truly divine judgment? Or had humanity done this to itself, fulfilling the prophecies through its own thirst for power? Clouds of smoke and dust drifted across the horizon, as if nature itself mourned. The Red Horseman's presence felt undeniable. Famine was next, pressing its skeletal hand upon the world. Mara's party grew smaller and weaker each day. Food was nearly impossible to find. Stores had been raided, crops failed, and ration lines turned into battlegrounds. Desperation hung in the air like a potent toxin. They passed through a once thriving market town. Empty stalls were littered with debris and broken pottery. The smell of decay hovered in stagnant air. Mara remembered the Black Horseman, Famine, whose appearance would drive the world into starvation. Every step she took brought her face to face with scenes that could have been plucked straight from Scripture. They scavenged what they could: a handful of dry beans found in a cracked jar, a half-rotten apple that Mara's younger brother, Micah, tried to nibble before spitting out bitter pulp. A frail old woman traveling with them collapsed, too weak to stand. One of the men carried her in his arms for hours, but by nightfall, her breathing had ceased. Mara knelt beside her lifeless form, a prayer on her lips. She had never witnessed so much death. She buried her face in her hands, trying to remember better days, days when bread was plentiful, when laughter sounded in kitchens. The silent, hungry faces around her weighed heavily on her heart. In the shadows of a wrecked grain silo, they found a few ears of corn hardened by time. They boiled them in a makeshift pot over a sparse fire. The kernels were tough and flavorless, but they ate in silence, grateful for anything. A traveler pointed to distant hills, where smoke rose again, but this time it carried the faint aroma of cooking flesh. Cannibalism. Mara recoiled in horror. Famine had stripped away more than dignity or comfort. It stole morality and hope. She shuddered, praying for deliverance from the endless hunger. Disease came quietly at first: coughs, fevers, rashes. Then it spread like wildfire. One morning, Mara woke to find her brother shivering uncontrollably. By afternoon, he was delirious. She did what she could, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead, praying softly, but the medicine they once took for granted was gone. Pharmacies looted long ago. The travelers waded through abandoned hospitals filled with broken glass and empty vials. Corridors echoed with moans, and pleas long faded into silence. Discarded syringes and overturned gurneys told stories of panic and helplessness. Mara's footsteps crunched on shattered tiles. Everywhere, the Pale Horseman's touch was evident: disease, pestilence, the invisible killer claiming lives without mercy. Some travelers wore scraps of cloth over their faces, hoping to ward off infection. Others dabbed pungent herbs on their skin. Few measures helped. They could only watch as loved ones dwindled, their eyes sinking into hollow sockets, their breath rattling like dry leaves. Mara's brother coughed harder, blood spotting his lips. She knelt beside him, tears carving paths down her soot-stained cheeks. "Hold on," she whispered, voice trembling. She remembered stories that in the end times, the Pale Rider was followed by Hades. She felt that presence now, lurking in each ragged cough. As night fell, the group settled in a quiet cemetery. Ironically, it felt safer than the roads. They lit a small fire and huddled close. Mara cradled Micah's head in her lap. He whispered something faintly, her name, or maybe a prayer, before his breathing slowed. With a final, soft exhalation, he slipped away. Mara's sobs broke the hush, and others murmured prayers. She laid him gently on the grass, knowing it would not be long before she too would be tested by the silent specter haunting the world's shadows. The tribulation deepened, not just in the form of physical hardships, but spiritual persecution as well. Mara's group encountered other survivors who warned that a new kind of oppression had begun. Armies and warlords were not the only threats. Religious hunters roamed the lands, seeking anyone who refused to abandon their faith. In a desolate square where a statue had fallen and shattered, Mara saw a disturbing scene. Several people knelt in chains, accused of spreading dangerous teachings. A makeshift tribunal, masked figures wielding crude rifles, presided over them. Those who prayed openly or spoke of hope and divine deliverance were labeled enemies. Mara and her companions hid in the shadows, watching in horror. The accused were sentenced swiftly, the punishment unspeakable. Mara averted her eyes, clutching the small pendant of a cross that her grandmother had given her. The brutality stunned her. Didn't the texts warn that believers would face persecution? They slipped away before they could be noticed. Hearts pounding. Later, in the cover of a half-collapsed bell tower, Mara whispered verses she remembered from childhood. Others joined her quietly, their voices trembling. The world was a living nightmare: war, famine, plague, and now people persecuted for their faith. Mara recalled words that promised salvation, but only after a terrible trial. She prayed that those who remained faithful would find the courage to endure. Her faith was tested with each passing hour. Before dawn, they moved again, navigating rubble-strewn streets. On a distant rooftop, Mara spotted silhouettes, perhaps watchers searching for those who dared to believe. She wondered how many were left who remembered the old scriptures, who still trusted in a higher plan. Every step felt like walking a tightrope between hope and despair, truth and death. The Great Tribulation had truly begun. The world's torment seemed to intensify in waves, like carefully orchestrated movements of a cosmic symphony. Mara and her companions trudged onward as reports filtered through tattered newspapers and hushed rumors. Seas turning red like blood, rivers fouled beyond use. Boils and sores appeared on the skin of many. The relentless sun scorched the land, and people cried out for mercy. They stumbled upon a lifeless village by a coast now reeking of decay. The shoreline gleamed with a crimson sheen. Dead fish bobbed among broken piers, their eyes clouded, their flesh rotting under a merciless sun. Mara covered her nose and mouth. She remembered the 7 bowls of wrath described in the book of Revelation, each poured out by angels, unleashing catastrophic judgments. A man in their group knelt by the shore, sobbing. He said he once fished these waters, feeding his family with the ocean's bounty. Now it was poison. Another traveler pointed toward the sky where the sun burned with uncanny intensity. They quickly retreated inland, seeking shade. At midday, as they took shelter under a half-collapsed highway overpass, the ground shook. Some cried out, thinking it an earthquake. Others remembered the prophecies: lightning, thunder, and quakes reshaping the earth. As dust settled, Mara noticed sores on an old woman's arm, painful blisters erupting overnight. They prayed together. Some wept openly. Were they living in the times the scriptures warned about? Each day's hardships mirrored the sacred texts too closely to dismiss as coincidence. The group resolved to keep moving. There was no safety, but standing still felt like surrender. They passed fields where the sunlight seemed to scorch the soil black. Everywhere, nature and humanity writhed under the pouring out of these bowls, as if creation itself cried out for final resolution. Whispers of something called the mark grew among survivors. Rumors told of a mandatory sign forced upon people's hands or foreheads, without which they could not buy or sell. Mara's group moved cautiously, often skirting around towns where armed guards patrolled checkpoints. They approached one settlement at dusk. lured by the promise of clean water and a few days' rest. The guards demanded proof of allegiance, the mark. Some travelers ahead of them revealed strange tattoos or implants. In return, they were allowed entry to a walled enclosure that promised shelter. Mara's heart sank. She recalled the warnings about the mark of the beast, an emblem of loyalty to a false authority, a means of control that would condemn one's soul. Her companions were divided. Some argued they must accept the mark to survive. Others, eyes bright with conviction, refused to bend. In a tense whisper, Mara urged them to stand firm. They knew Scripture foretold dire consequences for those who accepted the mark. She tried to remind them. Their lives were short here, but eternity mattered. That night, they huddled near a derelict farmhouse on the outskirts of the settlement, debating their fates. With no mark, they faced hunger and exposure. With it, they feared losing their souls. Some tearfully broke away, heading toward the guarded gates, desperate to taste a morsel of bread. Mara wept softly as a portion of their group parted ways. She couldn't blame them. Desperation clouded minds. But she clutched her grandmother's cross, recalling the verses that warned not to receive that damned seal. She hoped fervently that God would provide another path. As the moon rose, pale and hollow, Mara and the few who remained loyal retreated deeper into the countryside, choosing hardship over damnation, their faith forging a fragile shield against despair. In the heart of a shattered metropolis, Mara's dwindling group encountered whispers of powerful figures, a beast of authority and a false prophet who performed dazzling miracles. They said crowds gathered before them, mesmerized by illusions and promises of restoration. Mara and her companions slipped through alleyways overgrown with weeds and cluttered with rusted cars. They found a vantage point on a collapsed rooftop where they could watch a gathering in the old city square below. A tall figure stood atop a platform of twisted steel. He spoke with charisma, his voice amplified by makeshift speakers. He promised prosperity to those who bore the mark, demonstrating miracles, water turning clear where it had been murky red, fire summoned seemingly from thin air. The crowd cheered. Mara felt a chill slide down her spine. Beside him stood another figure, cloaked in robes embroidered with shimmering symbols. This one spoke softly, yet his words carried a hypnotic sway. He urged the people to trust the beast, to abandon old superstitions and embrace a new order. Those who refused, he warned, would be left behind. Mara gripped the crumbling ledge, her knuckles white. Here they were, the beast and the false prophet, just as foretold. Their influence was undeniable. People starved, desperate for salvation, lured by false miracles. Before her eyes, two believers who dared to speak out were dragged forward. The prophet raised a hand. They cried out to God, refusing to kneel before the beast's image. With a gesture, soldiers silenced them forever. Mara trembled, stomach churning with anger and sorrow. The scriptures had said these forces would deceive many. Watching the crowd cheer and weep in adoration made the world feel heavier. She prayed silently for strength, for the endurance to resist such seductions of false hope. They retreated from the city, hearts heavy. Mara's companions were few now, loyal ones who refused the mark and shunned false prophets. They found shelter in a wooded grove where once a national park thrived. The trees were thinning, leaves yellowed, streams polluted. Still, it offered some cover. Huddled around a small fire, they shared stories and scripture from memory. An elderly woman recalled verses about a coming final battle called Armageddon, a place where armies would gather. Others repeated comforting passages, that those who endured would one day see a new heaven and new earth. Mara's role evolved into that of a guide, her memory of old teachings steadying trembling hearts. Her words were soft and steady, even as despair gnawed at her. She spoke of endurance, of the Lamb who would conquer, of a kingdom that would outlast all suffering. The others listened, eyes shining with tears and quiet hope. They prayed together, hands clasped, while distant thunder rumbled. No one knew how long they'd last. They were hungry, weak, and fearful. But in that grove, a fragile bond formed, trust in something greater than fear. Night brought dreams to Mara's sleep, visions of angels pouring wrath from golden bowls, rivers drying to prepare the way for armies, and a final confrontation where good would stand against evil. She woke, breathless and shaken, yet with a strange calmness in her heart. Everything was unfolding as foretold. She knew faith must not falter now. As dawn broke, they packed their few belongings and pressed onward again. Circling the distant roads, they glimpsed forces gathering, soldiers, armored vehicles, banners bearing unfamiliar sigils. The stage was being set. The next and final chapters of the long-prophesied conflict were waiting just beyond the horizon. As they traveled farther, tales of a dried Euphrates River reached them. It was said that one of the bowls of wrath had caused waters to recede, paving a path for armies from the east to march unhindered. Though Mara's group never saw the great river themselves, the constant stream of rumors painted a vivid picture. Through abandoned villages and over cracked highways, they witnessed an unprecedented migration of warriors. Streams of men in ragged uniforms, scavenged vehicles with crude banners, all moving westward like rivers of human desperation. Many bore strange marks and insignia, united under some terrible allegiance. Others simply followed, drawn by the promise of loot or salvation. Mara's group avoided these masses. They hid by day in half-collapsed barns or beneath fallen bridges. By night, they crept through shadows, guided by starlight. Occasionally, they heard sermons broadcast over makeshift loudspeakers in distant camps, where leaders invoked the name of the beast and urged their followers to prepare for a grand confrontation. Whispers among refugees claimed the stage was set for Armageddon, the ultimate battle prophesied in ancient scriptures. Mara shuddered. She recalled that after Armageddon, evil would meet its end. But at what cost? One evening, they passed a broken sign that once read, Megiddo, the ancient battleground. The irony was not lost on Mara. History's old fields would witness the world's final war. As they huddled in a damp cellar, the historian in their group, who had long since grown quiet, finally spoke. We are standing in the pages of prophecy. Our choices, our faith, will define us now. His voice trembled. Mara nodded. In these times, it felt as though a divine hand guided events. War drums echoed in the distance, merging with the forlorn howl of wind through empty streets. Another bowl's effect darkened the kingdom of the beast. Rumors spread of inexplicable darkness covering cities that had once been centers of authority. Mara's group dared to approach one such place. Curious and fearful, as they neared, they saw that the streets were shrouded in a shadow that defied the sun. It was midday, yet the air felt like twilight. Lamps flickered, casting weak halos of light. The smell of rot and despair hung thick. People stumbled blindly, their eyes watering, some screaming that they could no longer bear the gloom. Within this darkness, the beast's minions still patrolled, but their confidence seemed shaken. They muttered about failing power grids and failing morale. Mara and her companions moved silently through alleyways, searching for supplies. They found broken crates of spoiled food and water tanks tainted beyond safety. In the center of what once might have been a grand plaza stood a statue with a faceless head, likely torn down by rebels or ravaged by war. The darkness seemed thicker there, as if clustering around the heart of the beast's influence. Some said it was divine judgment, light withheld from those who reveled in evil. One of Mara's companions stumbled upon a hidden cellar where candles burned dimly. Inside, they found frightened families whispering prayers. They welcomed Mara's group timidly, sharing what meager scraps remained. Huddled together, they talked of hope. Even as darkness pressed in, Mara realized that even in the thickest shadow, faith could kindle a small glow. Though the world reeled under divine wrath, goodness still flickered. They stayed only briefly. Staying too long might draw attention. As they slipped away, Mara looked back at the darkened city. She remembered a verse. Darkness would fall upon the throne of the beast. Perhaps this was a sign that redemption was near. Whispers grew louder. Armies were converging. From every corner of the broken world, factions marched toward a prophesied battlefield. Mara's group found themselves on the fringe of this tremendous migration. They witnessed convoys of patched-up tanks, mercenaries trading bullets for scraps, and warlords proclaiming their might. Some said the Euphrates had dried completely, clearing a path for kings of the East to join this final stand. Others claimed supernatural forces guided these armies. Mara and her companions kept low profiles. They scavenged what they could from the wake of these marching hordes: a half-empty canteen, a few grains of rice hidden in a storeroom's corner. In abandoned houses, they sometimes found crude maps pinned to walls, with arrows and symbols converging on a single point. The name Armageddon now passed from lip to lip, even those who knew nothing of Scripture sensed something profound was at play. Mara felt a strange calmness within. The world was unraveling, yet she trusted that these events had purpose. The relentless horrors were steps on a staircase leading to the ultimate resolution. Near a shattered motorway, they encountered a straggling soldier who told them of monstrous weapons and impossible alliances forming just beyond the next valley. He laughed bitterly, calling it the end of ends. They left him behind, unwilling to be drawn into madness. Night fell, cool and silent. Mara's group lay beneath a broken viaduct, watching the stars. Someone asked if there was still hope. Mara answered quietly, "Yes." The text promises a final victory. All this suffering leads to a moment when truth prevails. They rested uneasily, knowing at dawn they would see more armies, more madness. The drumbeats of war played like a funeral march, promising a climax that would shake creation itself. As Mara stood in the shadow of the mysterious lone horseman, her heart raced with questions. Was this a harbinger of war, a savior, or something else entirely? What do you think this enigmatic figure represents? Let me know in the comments. Your theories might just unlock another layer of this gripping tale. They finally reached a vantage point over a wide valley, rumored to be the setting for the great confrontation. From this ridge, Mara's group saw countless camps spread like a patchwork quilt of malice. Campfires flickered in the darkness, forming constellations of human desperation below. At dawn, trumpets and distant shouts echoed. Weapons clanked, engines sputtered. Then, something extraordinary happened. The sky parted, revealing a presence unlike any seen before. Mara's heart hammered as she recalled the scripture: a white horse, its rider called faithful and true. Though Mara and her friends could only glimpse from afar, they saw a radiant figure atop a pure white steed. His eyes, they said, blazed like fire. An army followed behind him, their garments white and clean. This was no ordinary host. It felt like heaven itself descending. Cries of fear and awe rose from the camps below. Some soldiers dropped their weapons. Others fired wildly into the sky. Still others knelt, sobbing. Mara's eyes filled with tears. The great battle of Armageddon was beginning, and divine forces were revealed. In that moment, Mara knew these prophecies were not just words. They were living truths. She trembled, not from terror but from overwhelming reverence. The rider's presence radiated justice and authority, more potent than the combined might of all earthly armies. As the first clashes sounded, Mara and her companions prayed fervently. This was a war not decided by human cunning or steel. It was a cosmic reckoning. Every soul below would be tested, every allegiance measured. High on the ridge, Mara watched with a heart full of humble faith. At last, the climax of the prophecies had arrived. The final struggle between good and evil now raged in the Valley of Legends. The roar of battle rose like a living thing, shaking the valley below. Armies charged, colliding in a chaos of screams and steel. But through it all, the rider on the white horse advanced calmly, sword drawn, eyes aflame. The beast's forces unleashed every terror they possessed: rockets, bullets, fire. Yet the heavenly host remained unscathed. In the chaos, Mara's group witnessed the impossible. Lightning crackled from the sky, splitting the earth. Unseen winds scattered tanks like fallen leaves. The very ground seemed to tremble in reverence for the divine warrior. Then, in the thick of battle, the beast revealed itself, towering and grotesque, a perversion of authority. It roared defiance, its armies rallying. The false prophet stood beside it, chanting blasphemies and conjuring illusions. The crowd below faltered. Could anyone stand against such monstrosities? But the rider, clad in light and justice, pressed forward. Mara could not see every detail at this distance, yet she felt each moment resonate in her soul. She knew the prophecies, that the beast and the false prophet would be captured, their end sealed. Through the tumult, Mara's heart lifted in expectation. The scriptures had foretold this victory. Evil had grown fat and bold, but it would meet its rightful doom. When the rider's sword flashed brighter than the sun, a hush fell. In that silence, Mara imagined the beast and false prophet faltering, their power undone. The armies that once boasted of their might began to break. Mara and her companions fell to their knees, weeping in awe. This was not just a battle. It was the unmasking of centuries-old lies, the vindication of truth. She understood now. All the suffering, all the trials, had led to this pivotal moment of judgment and redemption. A roar of anguish split the air. Mara's group strained to see what happened. Words spread among the ragged onlookers scattered along the ridges. The beast had been captured. The false prophet, too, dragged in chains of ethereal light. They were cast into a place of final torment, a lake of fire. Some said, blazing with unquenchable justice. In the wake of their fall, the enemy armies scattered, leaderless and confused. The heavenly host advanced, and a great silence descended. Victory, Mara wept, overwhelmed by gratitude and relief. The forces that had terrorized the world were undone. In that silence, something stirred. The atmosphere changed, as though creation itself breathed a sigh. Mara's companions embraced, tears streaming down their cheeks. Yes, the earth bore scars, famine, war, plague, but the ultimate tyrants had fallen. As dust settled, the distant cries of soldiers melted into quiet sobs or stunned murmurs. Some survivors dropped their weapons, calling out for mercy. Others fled aimlessly, unmoored from the evil they once served. Mara prayed again, thanking the divine for this deliverance. Yet she knew the story did not end here. The prophecies spoke of a resurrection, a final judgment, and a new creation. They would need to endure a little longer. Exhausted and trembling, Mara's group descended from the ridge. They approached the valley's edge cautiously. The world they stepped into now was changed. Without the beast and the false prophet, a shadow had lifted. Yet the aftermath of Armageddon was sobering. Scorched earth, broken metal, and countless bodies. Even in victory, sorrow lingered. Mara clung to the hope that the next chapters promised restoration. She remembered verses about a time when death would be no more, and tears wiped away. That day, she vowed, she would stand ready. In the days following the great battle, something miraculous began. Graves opened. The long dead, those who had perished in floods, wars, disease, arose. Mara watched in astonishment as, in a quiet cemetery, soil shifted, hands emerged, not as decaying horrors, but as living beings restored. The people rising from these graves were calm, as if waking from a long sleep. They looked around with gentle wonder, their eyes peaceful. Some recognized loved ones who had survived through the tribulations. Tearful reunions dotted the landscape. Mara wept openly when she saw her brother, Micah, standing among the risen. He was healthy, free of the fever and blood that had claimed him. She rushed into his arms. He smiled, eyes bright, as though no suffering had ever tainted him. This resurrection was not a ghoulish thing. It was holy, a foretaste of the final reconciliation the scriptures promised. The world had witnessed horror upon horror, but now it beheld something beyond imagining. Life restored, death reversed. Word spread that across the lands, the faithful who had died were returning. Mara knew the prophecies. At the end, the dead would rise. This was preparation for the final judgment. The earth itself trembled with anticipation. At night, under a gentle moon, Mara and Micah sat side by side, whispering their stories. She told him of the horrors she endured. He shared some dim memory of rest, of waiting in God's embrace. Around them, other families, once torn apart, reunited in hushed joy. They did not know how long this time of waiting would last, but it felt like a divine gift. For once, the terror had lifted, replaced by a calm expectancy. Mara closed her eyes. grateful beyond words, holding her brother's hand. Soon after, a great throne was glimpsed in the clouds. Many said they could feel its presence rather than see it clearly. But Mara, gazing skyward, sensed a vast seat of judgment gathering over the horizon. All souls, living and dead, would stand before it, their deeds weighed. They traveled to a wide plain where countless multitudes assembled. Figures of every age, nation, and language stood side by side. The air hummed with quiet awe, though no one gave orders. Everyone seemed drawn to the same spot by a mysterious pull. Mara felt no fear, only reverence. She trusted the judge who presided beyond mortal sight. She held Micah's hand. Together, they joined the great congregation. There were no chaotic shouts or forced marches. Instead, a profound hush settled. One could almost hear hearts beating in anticipation. Mara remembered the prophecies, the final judgment, where books would be opened, and each soul's truth revealed. In the stillness, Mara recalled her life, the struggles, the choices, the moments of kindness and despair. She hoped that the judge, who saw all hearts, would understand her failures and her faith alike. A sound like distant thunder rolled across the crowd. Some cried softly, others bowed their heads. Yet in that trembling moment, Mara felt comfort. This judgment was not arbitrary cruelty. It was the unveiling of truth. Those who clung to the beast's lies would face consequences. Those who sought truth and love, despite their frailties, would find mercy. The plain was endless, and the people countless. Yet Mara did not feel lost. She was part of a grand tapestry woven through time. The final judgment had come, and the entire universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the eternal decree of justice and grace. One by one, individuals stepped forward. The final judgment was beyond human time. No one grew impatient. Mara saw figures vanish into shimmering light as if stepping into a realm of truth. She could not see the judge's face, but felt his presence, infinite understanding, perfect righteousness. When it was Mara's turn, she and Micah approached together. Memories unfolded in her mind. Times she feared, times she was selfish, but also times she loved and sacrificed. A warmth enveloped her, as if gentle arms embraced her soul. She knew her failings and her longing for forgiveness. In that timeless moment, burdens fell away. Mara sensed an acceptance beyond human words. She had chosen faith over despair, compassion over hatred. Her sins were acknowledged, but they no longer condemned her. She felt gratitude, tears falling. Around her, she saw some weep with joy, others wail in regret. Some souls found themselves cast aside, having clung tightly to evil. It was not a matter of revenge, but of truth revealing that darkness cannot dwell in eternal light. When Mara stepped back onto the plain, her heart was lighter. Micah, too, shone with a serene glow. They looked about, seeing some faces radiant with peace, others contorted in sorrow, fading into distant gloom. She understood now. Those who embraced truth and love were welcomed into everlasting life. Those who had made themselves one with evil could not remain. Though saddened by the loss of some, Mara trusted the justice of the judge. Suffering and wickedness had no place in the eternal kingdom. The final sorting had happened. Now they stood on the threshold of a new reality, a world without the scars of sin. The promise of restoration beckoned. Soon, the old earth began to dissolve like a morning mist under a brilliant sun. The landscapes of ruin and war faded. The seas that had turned red, the scorched fields, the ruined cities, all passed away. Mara stood with Micah and countless others, watching as reality shifted. There was no pain or fear in this transition. It felt as though a heavy blanket of sorrow was gently lifted from creation's shoulders. In place of the old came a new vision, a new heaven and a new earth. The sky was clearer, the land lush and pure. Gone were the scars of conflict and decay. Flowers bloomed where ashes once lay. Streams ran crystal clear. Singing softly, Mara stepped forward, barefoot on soft grass. She marveled at trees that shimmered with life, and gentle winds carrying fragrances of blossoms never before known. The sun shone gently, not harshly, and the air felt like love made breathable. The memory of old suffering lingered only as a distant echo, a reminder of what had been overcome. Everyone around her bore a quiet joy, free of hunger, disease, and violence. They recognized each other not as strangers from distant lands, but as kin in a grand family. In this renewed world, Mara sensed no threat. The time of tribulation had passed. The beast was gone, the mark meaningless, the plague and famine just old shadows. Now, life opened before them like a garden waiting to be tended. She knelt, running her fingers through the fresh grass, tears of gratitude falling. This was the promise fulfilled, a realm of peace and purity, forged from the crucible of hardship and tested faith. The sound of gentle laughter drifted from distant hills. At last, the old order had passed away. Then Mara saw it, a great city descending from above, shining like a jewel, the New Jerusalem. It shimmered with translucent walls, adorned with precious stones, each facet reflecting heaven's glory. Its streets glowed like gold, yet somehow even purer. The city settled gently, uniting heaven and earth. Mara walked toward it, heart thrumming with awe. It radiated a presence more comforting than any home she had known. There were gates, each a single pearl, open wide, inviting all who were redeemed. Inside, she found a river of life, clear as crystal, flowing through the heart of the city. On its banks grew the tree of life, its leaves healing the nations. People drank and laughed, their voices echoing in harmonious chorus. Mara ventured deeper, amazed by the architecture. No temple was there, for the divine presence was its temple. She felt that presence in every glimmer of light, every breath of air. It was as if love and truth had taken shape, forming streets, walls, and gardens. She touched the smooth surface of a wall carved with ancient patterns. Nearby, children ran, giggling freely, while elders chatted under flowering vines. Diversity of faces and cultures blended into a tapestry of unity. Mara knew this was the culmination of all those prophecies, the final promise now visible. Suffering was not only ended, it was redeemed into eternal joy. The New Jerusalem was the heart of the new creation, proof that every tear shed had been counted and turned into laughter. Looking up, she glimpsed the Lamb's light shining everywhere. No sun or moon needed. The glory of God was its illumination. This city, this holy place, was the inheritance of all who had endured. Mara stepped forward, trembling with grateful wonder. Inside the New Jerusalem, Mara tasted the water from the river of life. Its flavor was beyond anything she'd known, pure, enlivening, as if her soul drank as well as her body. She touched the leaves of the tree of life, feeling a gentle hum of wholeness. Children danced along the golden streets. Friends long separated embraced in tearful joy. Broken families were made whole. Individuals who once limped or stumbled now ran with effortless grace. The city sang with peace. No discord could find root here. Mara passed under an archway where vines of fragrant flowers bloomed. She joined a circle of people seated near the river's edge, listening as someone read from a book written in letters of living light. The words were love and truth itself. Her heart brimmed with gratitude. She recalled how faith had guided her through horrors unimaginable, how prophecies once spoken in whispers had now taken form. The Lamb's presence was palpable, a gentle warmth in every breath. A man approached, smiling. He wore garments that shimmered with subtle patterns. "Welcome," he said, voice kind. "All is restored. Here, we dwell with the Almighty. Forever." Mara nodded, tears in her eyes, unable to speak. Across a small bridge of translucent stone, she spotted Micah waving, gesturing for her to come see a grove of singing birds. Beyond him, others knelt, giving thanks, their voices entwining in praise. The city's harmonies needed no instruments. Every whisper, every step produced a melody. Mara ran to join Micah. The sorrow of old times faded to a story now complete. In this eternal presence, she felt as if every question, every wound, found its answer in the boundless love streaming from the Lamb's throne. Mara wandered through avenues lined with brilliant gems set into the walls. each stone telling a story of redeemed struggles. She encountered old friends she thought lost forever. There was Anna, the gentle neighbor who died during the famine, now laughing and healthy. There was Josiah, who once succumbed to despair, now embracing joy. In the heart of the city, Mara found a grand square where many gathered. There was no fear, no anger, only a profound kinship. People shared tales of their old lives, not with bitterness, but as lessons cherished and overcome. She reunited with mentors and elders who had inspired her faith. They embraced like dear family. Tears were frequent, but they were tears of joy, of love overflowing. No one lacked anything. The concept of scarcity belonged to a forgotten past. Music without source drifted through the air, soft melodies shimmering in the golden light. Conversations wove together, creating a symphony of kindness and delight. It seemed impossible that hatred, cruelty, or jealousy had ever existed. Mara smiled, remembering the old prophecies about a place where sorrow and death would vanish, where pain would be replaced by everlasting comfort. She realized now how truly those words had been fulfilled. Each moment here reaffirmed that love had conquered. In a quieter corner of the city, beneath a flowering arbor, she rested. Micah dozed at her side, safe and content. She closed her eyes, breathing in the fragrance of eternal spring. Her heart was at peace. This was eternal life, not a static existence but a rich, eternal unfolding of goodness and understanding. This was the life promised by the Lamb, a reality where every tear was wiped away, every wound healed, and every soul at home. Mara remembered what had been required to reach this realm: faith, perseverance, and acceptance of grace. She reflected on the tribulations, why they had come. They were not senseless cruelties, but necessary purifications. Evil had to be exposed and defeated so that life could bloom anew. In a quiet alcove, beneath a tree with shimmering leaves, she listened to a conversation between two wise souls. They spoke of the old times, not with regret, but understanding. Humanity had chosen its path, and the consequences were dire. Yet the divine plan never wavered, to bring forth a kingdom unshakable. Mara closed her eyes, remembering how frightened she once was, how uncertain about trusting the old prophecies. Now she saw the tapestry of destiny woven with perfect skill. Nothing had been wasted, no tear shed without purpose. Was she sad that some souls were lost? Yes. She still felt compassion for them, yet understood that all had been given chances. Love cannot force itself where it is not wanted. Truth cannot dwell where lies are embraced. In this new creation, every good deed, every act of kindness, shone with eternal significance. The laments of the oppressed, the prayers of the faithful, nothing was forgotten. Justice and mercy had found their perfect expression. Rising, Mara stretched her arms wide, feeling free as never before. She felt the presence of the Lamb all around, reassuring and gentle. She knew that endless ages stretched before them, each moment brimming with meaning. Gazing at the distant hills, she felt no fear, no anxiety. This was a realm beyond pain. The memories of hardship made this joy more profound. The darkness of the old world accentuated the brightness of the new. Everything was as it should be. Mara explored further, finding that the city had no boundaries, no walls limiting its influence. Beyond its gates, the renewed earth stretched endlessly. People ventured into forests, mountains, and plains that glowed with vitality. She joined a small group eager to discover what lay beyond the city. They found fields where the soil was rich and welcoming, animals gentle and unafraid. Lions and lambs grazed side by side, a living symbol of peace. Streams chuckled through meadows of flowers. In one clearing, they encountered a community forming a new village. They planned to cultivate the land, not in drudgery, but in joyous stewardship. Work and rest flowed together without strain or conflict. Mara marveled at how seamlessly humanity embraced this perfect balance, without greed, envy, or pride to darken their hearts. People worked together naturally, each gift contributing to a harmonious whole. Music drifted from a hillside where an impromptu choir sang praises to the Lamb. The sound made Mara's heart swell. All creation seemed to join in, from the rustling leaves to birds calling overhead. This was worship not as duty, but as overflowing gratitude. In that moment, Mara realized that the new earth was not static. It would be a place of endless growth, discovery, and creativity, freed from sin's shackles. Humanity could blossom into the fullness of its intended design. She helped plant a seedling, pressing it into fertile soil. It seemed fitting. Once she had wandered through famine-stricken fields. Now she nurtured life everlasting. The seed would grow, nourished by pure sunlight and gentle rain, a testament to the eternal springtime that now reigned. She looked around at smiling faces and gentle creatures, and knew this was the ultimate fulfillment of every hope. Mara paused beside a quiet stream, recalling the faces of those who did not stand here today. Some had chosen the path of darkness, rejecting every offer of redemption. She mourned them quietly, but the pain was tempered by understanding. This was a world of truth. Only those who embrace truth could dwell here. Love cannot be forced, and not all seeds fall on fertile ground. Still, their absence was a gentle ache, not a torment. She knew the Lamb's judgment was just, his mercy abundant. A companion sat next to her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We remember them," he said softly, "but we move forward, cherishing the life we share now." Mara nodded. She reflected that suffering had refined her soul, teaching her compassion and humility. Without darkness, one might never appreciate light. Now, in eternal daylight, she carried lessons learned in the valley of shadows. They rose and walked along the stream. Ahead, she saw children building a small raft from reeds. Their laughter sparkled. In this world, there would be no more tears of anguish, only tears of joy and empathy. Sorrow was not a curse but a distant memory that deepened their appreciation for the present glory. Mara inhaled deeply, grateful beyond measure. Her journey from fear and famine to eternal flourishing had shaped her. Faith had guided her through horrors and landed her in this gentle paradise. As they strolled back toward the city, bells chimed softly, a music of living stones. The sound reminded Mara that this was only the beginning of unending life. The story would continue to unfold, chapter after chapter of love, knowledge, and shared wonder. The throne of the Lamb stood at the heart of the New Jerusalem, radiating love and wisdom. Pilgrims traveled from across the renewed earth to praise, learn, and marvel at the source of all goodness. Mara joined them, eager to express her gratitude. Within the city's center, a vast gathering assembled. Some sang ancient hymns remembered from the old world. Others danced, and still others knelt in quiet adoration. There was no fear or obligation, only joyful reverence. Mara approached the throne, feeling its gentle radiance. Though she could not fully comprehend the presence before her, she knew it intimately in her heart. This was the one who guided her through storms, who turned prophecy into reality, who suffered and overcame death to open the way. She bowed her head, unable to contain tears, not tears of pain, but of overflowing awe and love. Here was the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, whose authority did not crush but lifted up, whose power did not wound but healed. Mara spoke softly, "Thank you." It was a simple phrase, but behind it lay all her memories, longings, and joys. She felt a quiet assurance in return, a gentle whisper that she was known and cherished. Around her, countless voices rose in a harmonious chorus. Together, they formed a music that no single heart could produce. This was worship not as duty, but as pure delight. In that harmony, Mara sensed the eternal bond between Creator and creation. When she stepped back from the throne, she did so with lightness. She carried in her soul a warmth that would never fade. The Lamb reigned forever, and all that dwelt here rejoiced in the perfection of his love. Life in the new creation flowed seamlessly, each moment filled with purpose and joy. Mara explored beyond the city's walls, riding on paths lined with fragrant blossoms. She visited communities thriving in love and cooperation, each contributing unique gifts. Pain and suffering were gone, but not complexity. There were still mysteries to discover, new forms of art and understanding. Mara found that learning did not stop. Wisdom deepened, Relationships expanded. Creativity soared. Without sin's distortion, every endeavor was noble and fulfilling. She watched artisans craft instruments that produced sounds unheard in the old world. She listened to scholars recount the grand narrative of redemption. Farmers tended fields that produced fruit in abundance. Children learned not from fear of punishment, but from a desire to share and grow. Mara paused one day to watch animals gather near a stream. Wolves lay down with lambs. Birds nested together in peace. The harmony extended to every living thing. Predation, violence, and fear were concepts of a lost era. In the twilight, though in truth, the light never faded fully, Mara and others joined in quiet reflection. They sat beneath glowing trees, speaking of the grandeur of existence. Some sang softly, their voices weaving gentle lullabies of eternal rest. There was no hurry, no deadlines, no decay. Instead, time was an endless opportunity to experience goodness. Mara smiled, remembering the struggles of the past. All the horrors had been transformed into a memory that deepened her gratitude. This was not the end of a story, but the beginning of an eternal chapter, freed from the boundaries of mortal life. Each soul matured in understanding and love. Mara dreamed of centuries to come, each one sweeter than the last. Mara stood atop a gentle rise overlooking a meadow. Deer grazed nearby, unafraid of her presence. The wind carried subtle fragrances, and she heard laughter drifting from distant orchards. She marveled at how the entire cosmos now aligned in perfect harmony. Overhead, the sky displayed a tapestry of soft colors, no longer just blues and whites, but hues unimaginable in the old world. It was as if the heavens danced in celebration, painting new patterns each moment. Mara reflected on the old world's divisions, nations, tribes, languages, religions, all the walls humans raised to separate themselves. Now there were no barriers, only understanding. The words of every tongue blended into a single language of love. She knelt, running her hand over the soft grass. Everything felt so alive. Every blade of grass singing a silent note in creation's symphony. This reality was pure gift, beyond any merit or achievement. In the distance, she saw friends, new and old, gathering beneath fruit-bearing trees. They waved, inviting her to join them. Mara smiled, knowing that companionship would always be there, overflowing without end. This place was not merely the absence of pain, but the presence of abundant life. A divine orchestration brought forth the beauty of each creature, each person, into a chorus of eternal praise. None were overshadowed. All contributed their unique voice. Rising, Mara walked down the slope. She carried no burdens, only fullness of heart. Every step forward took her deeper into endless delight, exploring facets of creation's infinite tapestry. She wondered if she would ever exhaust its wonders. She knew the answer was no. Eternity stretched out, not as a barren infinity, but as a garden of infinite blossoms, each petal a revelation of love. Mara joined her friends beneath the fruit trees. They laughed, shared stories old and new, and contemplated the mysteries of the divine. She realized she had become part of a grand, eternal fellowship. No more fear, no more despair. As they savored sweet fruits, Mara reflected on the prophecies that once seemed terrifying. They were not meant to inspire fear, but to guide souls through the darkness toward an unimaginable dawn. The judgments and trials had purified, exposing evil's futility and establishing truth's eternal reign. In this place, faith was no longer needed. Sight had replaced it. Hope had blossomed into reality, and love shone forth unhindered. Yet the memory of faith remained, giving depth to their eternal gratitude. Mara stood, raising her face to the soft sky. She whispered a final prayer, not out of need, but as an act of joy. The Lamb who once was slain now reigned undisputed. His sacrifice redeemed countless souls. Looking into the eyes of her companions, she saw reflections of that infinite love. None would ever hunger or thirst again. No tears would fall except those of happiness. The ages stretched before them, an endless story of discovering, loving, and glorifying the source of all life. Mara breathed deeply, embracing eternity. She understood now that the prophecies had always pointed here. A world made new. A creation healed and shining with divine glory. The laughter of friends, the song of birds, the gentle breath of the wind, all testified that the journey was complete, and yet only just begun. Mara smiled, stepping into the eternal morning, held forever in the light and love of the Lamb. And so, as Mara's journey leads her into the heart of prophecies fulfilled and battles waged between light and darkness, one truth becomes clear. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. If this story resonated with you, show some love by liking, sharing, and subscribing. And don't stop here. Join the conversation below. What would you do if faced with such unimaginable trials? Share your thoughts and let's keep this dialogue alive. Until next time, keep exploring the extraordinary.